Welcome back in Alive Now. I'm Austin Westfall. Well, here we are, day 4, the final day of the DNC, and political analyst Rich Rubino has been joining us for every day of this thing. Let's break it down. Let's put a bow on our coverage, Rich. Let's watch a little bit of the celebration. This is always, these are some of the more memorable images that come from these events. This was one of, if not the most important speech of Kamala Harris's career so far as well. What's the goal of a speech like this, Rich, and did she achieve it?
Well, I think the goal in terms of Vice President Harris is to introduce herself to the American public and to define herself. She's really, the Republicans want to define her in a very negative way. She wants to define herself in a very positive way. And she wants to draw a sharp contrast between herself and Donald Trump. And by that, I mean that she wants to draw contrast in the way that basically benefits herself in a very positive way, whereas Donald Trump wants to present her in a very negative, with negative connotations. That's really the purpose. The other purpose is to try to galvanize people who are already on your side to say, this is why you need to come out and vote. There are many Democrats, I think, who are kind of questioning whether she should be the nominee, maybe quietly, but they said, well, this is the person that the Democrats have put out there, so we're going to support them. So that's basically what I think the main goal. And I think you really achieved that, but it's also, I think, to try to get some persuadable voters. They're very elusive. There are very few persuadable voters, really in only about 8 different states. But it's also to try to get them to try to come off the fence and at least reluctantly support the candidate.
We continue to watch this live look at the United Center as the crowd filters out. Kamala Harris gives speeches all the time. Us in the political world, we call them stump speeches when they go from town to town giving speech after speech. What was different about tonight's speech compared to her stump?
That's an interesting question. And I think that this is actually very similar to the speeches she's been giving lately, the speech in Milwaukee, some of the speeches where she's been out with Governor Walz. This, in many respects, I think, was a stump speech. Now, where is it different? They obviously a stump speech. You try to give the same proposals. You talk. Well, part of it, the biography. I think the biography. She has not talked quite as much on the stump as she does in this forum. And I think also the fact, just the way that she would bring up Donald Trump and Donald Trump wanting to be an autocrat, wanting to be a dictator himself. That was probably a new line. But generally speaking, I think this speech, as well as Governor Walz's from last night, there were a lot of semblances that came from that speech, their stump speeches.
Yeah, how would you compare Harris's and Trump's headlining speeches? I think one of the most obvious things that people will notice is that Kamala's seemed a little more concise.
Yeah, his was an hour and 32 minutes rather, but who's counting? Hour 32 minutes, but who's counting? Hers was a lot more concise, as was Governor Walz. Governor Walz's address last night, even though he really galvanized the assembled crowd, he spoke for about 15 minutes, for example. So that's really what you try to do with a convention speech. Donald Trump is kind of sui generis in that when he speaks, he can speak for as long as essentially any crowd would have him. There are very few leaders that actually have that ability to speak for an hour 32 minutes. In terms of only the ones I can think of, potentially Fidel Castro can give these long 3-hour speeches. Louis Farrakhan can give 2-hour speeches, but Donald Trump is definitely in that crowd. Vice President Harris, she's more in the neighborhood of giving a traditional stump speech. Obviously, you change it a little bit as you go.
For our future was tonight's theme. After watching both conventions, what are the main points of contrast between the Democrats' view of the future and the GOP's view of the future?
It's interesting because it's really changing. And if you were to go back to say 2008 or 2012, 2004, it would have been a lot different. The Democrats were very much, by that time, very much opposed, for example, to President Bush's foreign policy in terms of the Iraq war going into Afghanistan. Many were non-interventionists on foreign policy. Today, with Donald Trump being the standard bearer, if you will, of the Republican Party, rather, the Republicans are now more of a non-interventionist party. They're more the political party, for example, that wants to very much stay on the sidelines between the Russia and Ukraine. Now, this is why, for example, you saw Adam Kinzinger, who is very much an interventionist Republican, I think you could even call him a neoconservative, go up and essentially endorse Vice President Harris and talk about why the Republican Party has kind of left him in terms of how different his policies were and how different the policies were, rather, under Vice President Harris, and say, under Mitt Romney, John McCain, George W. Bush. But I think the Republicans generally, it was non-interventionist foreign policy. It was very much being economic nationalist in terms of free trade. They even had the head of the Teamsters speaking at a Republican national convention, which you would never expect to have happen. And it's also, I think the other differences are in terms of immigration. Vice President Harris talks about a bill that was actually co-sponsored by Congress Senator James Langsford, a very conservative Republican senator from Oklahoma. That she says that Donald Trump was the reason the bill was killed. Donald Trump, on the other hand, talks about immigration and has a very muscular view on immigration. But I think its foreign policy is really kind of the contrast there. And I think also Vice President Harris says she'll give a middle-class tax cut, and she says that Donald Trump's tax cuts will go mostly to the opulent. That's another contrast. I'm sure Donald Trump obviously will say it goes to everybody, and that's where the disagreement will happen. That's what we'll see if there are presidential debates.
You know, I want to talk about celebrities. One of the big stories of today, of course, was Beyonce. There was some reporting out there to suggest that she was going to be there. She didn't end up being there. But we did see a lot of other big names attending the convention this week. We heard from Oprah, Stevie Wonder, Mindy Kaling, John Legend, The Chicks, Lil Jon, Kerry Washington, Pink, as you can see, performed tonight, Kenan Thompson, Eva Longoria. There were many more. Is the Democrat Party the party of celebrities, and do celebrity voices carry weight in an election? What kind of weight do they carry?
It's a good question. I don't think the Democratic Party tends to be more the celebrities, the party of musicians and actors. The Republicans, I think they're very much the party of country western singers. I think they're sometimes the party of professional athletes, sometimes business moguls. I think that their general effect is de minimis, but I think that it has the effect on trying to these conventions can be very boring, and I'm sure there are a lot of Americans that are turning on for their regularly scheduled program that are incensed when they turn on and they see these conventions. The celebrities that will come up are something that will kind of tie them, because they may not be interested in the American political process. They may be very low propensity voters. But when you hear Oprah Winfrey or if you see Pink up there, you're going to watch them because that's something you might be interested in. On the Republican side, you had Hulk Hogan, for example, and Hulk Hogan was somebody who was really an idol to children throughout the land, throughout America, and you have him giving a speech. And I could see somebody kind of channel surfing, and they may prefer to hear Hulk Hogan than, say, hearing a United States senator talking about the intricacies of NATO policy. So that's where I think they kind of come in, and also just the fact that they can be the reason for a candidate to go to for a fundraiser. For example, I know Jerry Brown, when he ran back in 1980, he had bands like the Eagles would appear at many of his conferences, and sometimes people would say, "Well, I'm not here necessarily for the band, for Jerry Brown. Rather, I'm just here for the band."
And of course, Dana White introducing Trump for his keynote speech at the RNC as well. Members of the Central Park Five, I want to ask you about this. The Central Park Five were wrongly convicted of rape and assault. They addressed the convention today, chastising former President Trump. For those who need to be caught up, Rich, why is this an important story? What does Trump have to do with it?
Very important. This was before Donald Trump was president. He spent $85,000 on a political advertisement, basically saying that they should be executed. This was at a time where there was a lot of division in the country about capital punishment. For example, someone like Mayor Ed Koch in New York City was someone who was very much in favor of it. Governor Mario Cuomo was against it. The two actually ran against each other for governor back in 1982. But this is really a very important issue in New York City at the time. And these gentlemen were all convicted. And later exonerated when it turned out that they did not commit the crime. But Donald Trump at the time said that they should be executed. One of them, I think, that landed up a city councilman in New York City. But this is, I think, a contrast, actually. And I think this might be part of the reason why it's always an advantage to be the party that goes second, right? Because the Republican Party put up relatives of those who had died in the Afghanistan withdrawal, and a lot of them said that Joe Biden did not care, that type of thing. This is very similar. It's kind of, I think, when you really play hardball politics, the Republicans under Trump certainly are willing to do it, and the Democrats are certainly willing to do it as well.
You know, we talk a lot about who spoke at the convention, but I also noticed that there was somebody we didn't hear from. We heard from a number of Democratic governors this week, like Roy Cooper, Wes Moore, J.B. Pritzker, Josh Shapiro, Kathy Hochul, but we didn't see California Governor Gavin Newsom on stage. He is at the convention. He spoke on the floor during roll call earlier this week. Brett Baer asked him about it today, and Newsom said, speaking on the floor is what he was asked to do, and he's doing everything he's asked to do. Are you surprised that a prominent member of the party like him didn't give a proper speech at the convention?
Yes, and first of all, obviously he's the governor of the biggest state in the country, but also the home state delegation of Vice President Harris. I could see him potentially being the warm-up act. Instead, it was Governor Cooper of North Carolina. Why they decided not to have him, I don't know. There are many other governors: Governor Whitmer of Michigan, Governor Maura Healey of Massachusetts. There was really a litany of other governors that got to speak. I actually think the governor that probably got the most coverage was probably Gray Davis, the former governor of California, because almost every time they showed they showed the California delegation, he was sitting there. Obviously, the cameras tend to have almost a gravitational pull toward him. But I think it was but I'm sure the governor, Gavin Newsom, is probably very disappointed. But he was somebody that many Democrats thought would be the Democratic presidential nominee if Joe Biden had bowed out. He's not, but he's been a loyal foot soldier for the vice president.
When you reflect on the past 4 nights, what were the most memorable moments? Who seemed to have the most effective appearances?
I think a lot of them were when AOC got up and spoke, and she really galvanized that crowd. She talked about the possibility for a ceasefire between the Israelis and the Palestinians. She's somebody that can really kind of cross the bridge, that can really be a conciliator between those on the left wing of the Democratic Party who are just absolutely inflamed at the Biden-Harris administration for not doing more to try to institute a ceasefire, and more establishment Democrats. She got a great applause. I think she's somebody, certainly, and I think ever since she was elected to Congress, a lot were saying, well, she's going to run for Senate, she's going to run for governor of New York. She probably at a point now where she can probably run for president if she ever chooses to, from the House of Representatives. Barack Obama's precedent is it no longer matters what office you serve in, how long you served. It's more with the message and whether you can galvanize people with that message. And I think she'll be somebody I would predict by around 2032, she'll probably be a presidential candidate, even if a dark horse candidate. She was somebody who really galvanized. I think the Governor Cooper came up. He was the warm-up act for the vice president. He immediately started to ask the question, and this is an easy one, I guess. You say, where are the voters in my home state of North Carolina? Where are the voters from Arizona? Where are the voters from Nevada? And they all stood up and cheered. That was something that I think was very interesting. And the other thing I thought was interesting, tonight is the most watched night of the convention. And they had some policy-oriented speeches, and one of them was by Leon Panetta. Leon Panetta, a former congressman from California, former chief of staff in the Clinton administration, former defense secretary under President Obama. He got up there and gave a speech talking about NATO, talking about President Trump being dangerous for the country. Was very much policy oriented, as, by the way, was Mark Kelly, the senator from Arizona, and another person who's on the short list for vice president. So I think that was very. I found those all to be very interesting choices to deliver speeches at this convention.
Let's think back to the Republican National Convention last month in Milwaukee. It was fresh off of former President Trump's assassination attempt, and there was a mountain of pressure on Biden because of his age. I remember talking with our analysts at the time, saying that the GOP felt the most united that it's felt in a long time, and the Dems felt more divided than they had in a long time. Is this a new Democratic Party compared to the one we were discussing just a month ago?
Ideologically, no. I think Vice President Harris and President Biden are very similar. I think most of the people in that convention are very, very much in line with both of them, although there are certainly some that are a lot more to the left of Vice President Harris and of President Biden. But that being said, I think that this is very much a unified party. I think when President Biden was going to be the nominee, there was a lot of kind of restlessness. A lot of Democrats were saying we really need somebody else. You look at the polls and you saw elephantine numbers. You saw over 75 or 80, 85% of the American people thought Joe Biden was too old, or at least thought that age should be an issue. Now they kind of have that, they kind of held that albatross off of them. And now the Democratic Party, I think, and it's not even necessarily for Vice President Harris. I think a lot of it is there's a Trump coalition, and the Trump coalition you saw at their convention in Milwaukee, and there's an anti-Trump coalition, and they want anybody they think can beat Donald Trump. They're looking at the polls. The polls show that Vice President Harris has a slight lead in the 8 showdown or swing states right now, and they're very galvanized for that. I think they perhaps they were cold on Vice President Harris going back to 2020 when she ran for president herself. She was not certainly a top tier candidate. She was somebody who had to drop out well before Iowa. But right now, I think they've kind of come to her aid. And right now, she is very much is galvanizing a figure in terms of the Democratic base, as probably Barack Obama was back in 2008 or Bill Clinton was back in 1992.
Now that all the nominations have been formally accepted, what's next? What's the next big chapter in this race? Is it the debate in 2.5 weeks?
Yes, absolutely. And that's amazing to think that it's only 2.5 weeks after this. It's really interesting. Donald Trump, I think after what happened with Donald Trump and after the assassination attempt, there are many who are saying that Joe Biden was going to lose the election because of that. Now there are many that are saying Donald Trump's not going to is going to lose the election because Vice President Harris has such a unified Democratic Party. Bottom line is both of them have to perform, and Vice President Harris has not really been in a debate stage short of when she ran for Democratic president herself. And she had a line where she took on Joe Biden over busing, but there was another instance where I think she was caught flat-footed, and you can probably see this on YouTube. But Tulsi Gabbard, kind of a minor candidate, Congresswoman from Hawaii, took on her record as a DA in California and Attorney General in terms of marijuana convictions. So be very interesting to see kind of what her skills are in terms of a debate sense. Very interesting to see her debate Donald Trump, and I think that the body politic and the entire political world will be absolutely entranced by it.
The always informative Rich Rubino joining us. Pleasure talking politics with you these past few days, sir. Take care.
Oh, I love doing it, Austin.